The elevator doors opened at 11:47 at night, and the first thing the emergency team saw was the man on the floor. Eyes closed, not moving, the gray cashmere of his sweater dark at the collar with cold sweat. The second thing they saw was the woman kneeling beside him. She was wearing a blue maintenance uniform. A small logo on the chest pocket said Crestwood Medical Center. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands were locked together over the center of his chest, and she was pressing down in a rhythm so steady and controlled that for one disorienting second, the lead paramedic thought she was a machine. She was not panicking. She was not crying. She was not looking at the doors. She was counting. 22, 23, 24. She finished the compression cycle. She tilted his chin. She breathed twice. She went back to compressions. The team moved in around her. She completed one more cycle. Then she sat back on her heels, stood up without a word, and stepped aside to let them through. One of the paramedics glanced at her, just for half a second, the look that says, "Who are you?" She had already turned away. By the time they had him stabilized, by the time the gurney was locked and the doors were opening onto the lobby and the voices were calling out vitals and the radio was crackling and all the noise of a saved life was filling the corridor, she was gone. No one asked her name. No one looked back toward the mop bucket sitting crooked against the hallway wall, wheels slightly turned, like it had been left there in a hurry by someone who had somewhere else to be. That was the only evidence she had ever been there at all. Now let me tell you who she was. Her name was Seren Voss. She was 29 years old, and 14 months before that night in the elevator, she had been one of the most promising neurovascular surgeons in the state of New York. She had graduated top of her residency cohort at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. She had been the youngest physician accepted into the neurovascular surgery program in the department's history. She had hands that other surgeons watched when she worked. Not because she was showy, because she was never showy, but because there was nothing wasted in her. Every movement precise, every decision grounded. The kind of clarity that takes years to build and belongs entirely to the person who built it. And then, 14 months ago, a man she trusted had handed her a pen and told her to sign her name. And she had, and everything had come apart. The morning after the elevator, the same as every morning, began at 4:45. A cracked phone screen, a radiator apologizing for the cold, a room so small she could reach both walls if she tried. In Washington Heights, the first train of the day rattled past 2 blocks away and shook the window in its frame like a question that never got answered. On the folding table beside her bed, there were 3 things. A cup, already rinsed the night before, because she had learned that mornings this tight had no room for the luxury of one extra step. A book with a spine so worn the title was barely legible. Meditations, by Marcus Aurelius. She had read it so many times the pages knew her fingerprints, and a folder held shut by 2 rubber bands because the clasp had broken 4 months ago, and she had not yet permitted herself the small extravagance of replacing it. On the front, in the font of a government document, New York State Department of Health. Office of Professional Medical Conduct, in the matter of Seren A. Voss, M.D. suspension order. She looked at it every morning, not as punishment, as a reminder of the problem she was solving. She pulled on her uniform, dark blue, the Crestwood logo on the chest. She zipped it up and looked at herself in the mirror. 14 months ago, she had stood in a different mirror, in the attending locker room, tying the strings of a surgical gown. Her name had been on the board. There had been a patient who needed her. There had been a team who trusted her. Now she was the overnight janitor at the same hospital, where the man who destroyed her was running the neurosurgery department. She had applied for that job deliberately. She needed to be inside those walls. She took the A train downtown. 40 minutes standing because the seats were already taken by the other invisible people of this city. The nursing assistants and kitchen staff and security guards who kept Manhattan running before it woke up and pretended they did not exist. At 86th Street, she stopped at the coffee kiosk in the station. Small coffee, black. She pressed her debit card to the reader. The machine beeped once, declined. The attendant was already looking somewhere else, giving her the courtesy of not watching. She put the card in her pocket without changing her expression. She had $4 in cash until Friday, and coffee was not a choice she could make today. Her bank balance last night had been $34.17. Her mother's monthly care bill at Hillcroft Memory Care was $9,200. The math was not something she did out loud anymore. She just carried it, the way you carry something heavy enough that your body has stopped registering the weight. Crestwood Medical Center rose above Central Park West, like a building that had never once doubted itself. All glass and white stone, fresh lily arrangements in the lobby every morning changed before 7 a.m. Marble floors polished to a reflection, front desk staff in blazers. The kind of place that communicated wealth and authority without needing to say a word. Seren did not enter through the front. She went in through the service entrance on 82nd Street, the heavy metal door with the different badge, the one that the surgeons in the physician parking lot walked past without looking at. She clocked in at 5:58, 2 minutes early. Ozzie Thatch was already there. 62 years old, originally from Kingston, 27 years at Crestwood. He hummed while he worked. Always the same rhythm, something between reggae and a lullaby he had never named. He looked at her when she came in. She nodded. He nodded back. That was the whole greeting. Two people who had understood that some mornings nothing needed to be said. She took her cart to the 6th floor. And that was where the day began. Because at the end of the physician corridor on the 6th floor, behind a door marked Department of Neurosurgery, the man who had taken everything from her was already inside. Dr. Callum Vane, 47 years old, Chief of Neurosurgery at Crestwood Medical Center, award-winning researcher, the kind of man whose handshake senators returned and whose endorsement could make or end a career. A man who spoke in conference rooms with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no by an institution that needed him more than he needed it. The man who had put a pen in her hand 14 months ago and said, "Just countersign the post-op notes, Seren, standard procedure," and had known precisely what he was setting in motion. She pushed her cart past his office door without slowing down. She did not look at the nameplate. She had her own work to do. There is something nobody tells you about losing everything you built. It is not the big moments that break you. It is the small ones. The Tuesday morning when you reach for your white coat by reflex and it is not there. The patient in the hallway whose gait is off and whose color is wrong, and you see it in half a second and you have to keep walking because you are not their doctor anymore. You are the person who cleans the floor they are standing on. Seren Voss had learned to live inside that gap. The gap between what she knew and what she was allowed to do. She mopped the floors. She emptied the bins. She restocked the supply closets with the efficient respect of a woman who understood that every job was real, even when the job was not who you were. And she watched. Because the thing about being invisible is that people stop editing themselves around you. Nurses talked at the station while she worked 10 feet away. Residents complained and documented shortcuts and whispered about near misses in voices loud enough for someone paying close attention to catch. She kept all of it in her head. She wrote nothing at work. Every night before she slept, she wrote in the notebook, "Let me take you back to the night it fell apart. Because you need to know what Callum Vane actually did to her. Not the version in the filing that used phrases like reckless disregard for post-operative protocol. The real version. The one that happened in a corridor at 11 at night under humming fluorescent lights with the antiseptic smell of a working hospital in the air." Serene had been 32 hours into a shift. She was a second-year resident. She had just come out of a 7-hour surgery standing across the table from Callum, watching his hands, watching his judgment, trusting both the way you trust the person who trained you when you have given them no reason not to. The patient was Marcus Oval, 61 years old, an attorney, post-operative, expected to be discharged in 3 days. Callum stopped her in the hallway. He was holding a folder. "Just countersign the post-op notes, Seren. Standard procedure." She had been exhausted. She had trusted him completely. She signed without reading every line. 3 days later, Marcus Oval was dead, and the post-op notes with her signature had numbers that did not match what had actually happened. Blood pressure readings that were too clean. Medication dosages that covered something up. She did not understand what had been covered up until the board hearing, when the opposing attorney explained it. Dr. Callum Vane had operated that night in a state of pharmacological impairment. Self-prescribed opioids, a prescription he had been quietly managing for 2 years following a back injury. His hands had been slightly off. The error had been subtle and fatal. And her signature had become the wall standing between his career and the truth. She had not known, but she had signed. And in the law, in medicine, in the brutal logic of institutional self-protection, that had been enough. She was restocking the supply closet on the 6th floor when she heard Callum's voice in the hallway outside. He was walking with a group of medical students, 4 of them, second years with the posture of people trying to look like they belonged. Callum had the quality that certain senior physicians develop, the ability to fill a corridor with his own gravity. He spoke and people leaned in. He paused and people waited. "Pay attention to every role in this hospital," he was saying, "even the ones that go unnoticed. Without the support staff, we surgeons could not function." He walked past the supply closet, and then he stopped, just outside. He looked down at the section of floor near the operating suite. "Though I do wish the cleaning team would pay more attention to the grout near the OR suite. Standards matter everywhere." He kept walking. The students followed. Serene stood in the supply closet with a bottle of disinfectant in her hand, and the door cracked open 2 inches. She said nothing. She did not allow herself even the small, private violence of gripping the bottle harder. She waited until the footsteps faded. Then she went back to work. Because she had something Callum Vane did not. She had a plan. For 6 months, she had been running 2 jobs inside Crestwood Medical Center. The official job involved a mop and a cart and a time clock. The unofficial job was a reconstruction project. She knew something nobody else in this building knew. Something that had kept her going through the months of sleeping in her Toyota Camry 3 blocks from the hospital, through the debt collector letters, through the morning her mother had looked at her from the bed at Hillcroft and asked, "Who are you, dear?" in a voice that was perfectly kind and perfectly empty. She knew the original audio recording existed. The night of the Oval surgery, there had been a standard quality assurance recording in the pre-op room, a digital file capturing a conversation between Callum Vane and his assistant Mirabelle Holt. A conversation in which Callum had made a specific statement about what he had taken that day and what it meant for his condition going into the operating room. That file had been deleted from the primary server. Mirabelle Holt had deleted it 48 hours after Marcus Oval died and 24 hours before the board proceedings began. But Seren had read enough of the Morrow Medical Initiative's publicly available infrastructure documentation to know that this building contained an older physical backup server in the sub-basement, a redundant unit installed in 2019 that had never been properly decommissioned when the hospital upgraded its systems in 2021. A unit that the Level 3 administrative access Mirabelle had used could not touch. She could not reach that server alone. She was not authorized to be anywhere near it, unless Ozzie Thatch, who had a master key inherited from the facilities manager who retired in 2018, decided to trust her. She was still working on that part. Dr. Petra Langs stopped her in the corridor at 9:15 that morning. Petra was 44, internal medicine, with the particular warmth that made patients relax immediately. She had been at Crestwood 12 years. She remembered everyone's name. She held out a blueberry muffin in a small paper bag. "You have been on the overnight rotation a long time," Petra said. "I see you here every morning. Are you doing okay?" Serene looked at the muffin, looked at the woman's face. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate it." She took the muffin. She watched Petra walk away. The particular quality of warmth in her posture, the way the gesture had appeared spontaneous when it had not quite been. Something about it sat wrong. She could not name what. She filed it in the part of her mind reserved for things that did not yet have a shape. She was on the 4th floor at 10:47, pushing her cart past the private waiting area near the neurology suites, when she saw him. He was sitting in one of the chairs along the wall, not in a patient gown. Dark slacks and a gray cashmere sweater that cost money while pretending it had not. And he looked wrong. That was the only way to put it. His color was wrong. The collar of the sweater was slightly damp. His right hand was resting on his knee in the particular stillness of a hand that is holding itself deliberately still, not the natural stillness of a hand at ease. She clocked his breathing, too controlled. He was compensating. And then she saw it. The slight swelling at his lower lip, the way his hand came up once, fast, to his throat, then dropped back to his knee. Her brain ran the calculation in less than a heartbeat. Anaphylaxis. Early onset. Something with penicillin or a cross-reactive compound administered in the last 60 to 90 minutes. His immune system was in the opening stages of a cascade that would become a crisis in under 30 minutes if nothing happened. And nothing was happening. The ward was busy. He was in civilian clothes. He was doing an excellent job of looking composed, which was the most dangerous thing a man in his situation could do. She pushed her cart to the corner of the waiting area. She crouched beside the front wheel as though adjusting the axle. She kept her voice completely level. "Sir, do not stand up. Breathe slowly. Do you have any allergies?" He looked at her. His eyes were clear and fully present. A man deciding in real time whether to trust a stranger holding a mop handle. "Penicillin," he said. "They gave me something about an hour ago. Do you have an EpiPen?" "No." She stood. She turned to the cart. She opened the lower compartment that officially held spare cleaning supplies, but had held, for 6 months, a small personal emergency kit. A habit she had never been able to break, because a doctor who stops watching for danger does not stop being a doctor. She pulled out the EpiPen. She came back and crouched beside him, positioning herself in the cart to break the sightline from the nursing station down the hall. "Right outer thigh," she said quietly. "Through the fabric is fine. I will count to 3. He looked at the EpiPen, looked at her. He did it. 1, 2, 3. She waited. His color began to change, slowly, the way color returns after epinephrine, like someone was turning a dial from winter toward spring. He exhaled. She took the used EpiPen and capped it and put it in her cart. "Drink water immediately," she said. "Tell a nurse you had a reaction. Do that in the next 5 minutes." She stood and pushed her cart forward down the hallway without looking back. She did not know his name. She would learn it in 3 days. His name was Calder Morrow, 38 years old, founder of Morrow Capital Group, a private equity firm managing $4.2 billion. The man behind the Morrow Medical Initiative, the foundation whose funding kept a significant portion of Crestwood's research operating. The person whose family name was on the building's research wing. He was not in the building as a donor receiving a tour. He was there anonymously, using a visitor badge under a different name, walking the floors the way he had been walking them for 4 years. Looking for something he could not name precisely, but could not stop trying to find. What Seren did not know, as she rounded the corner at the end of the 4th-floor hallway, was that Calder Morrow was watching her go. And he was already asking himself questions that had nothing to do with the EpiPen. 3 days after the 4th-floor hallway, Calder Morrow walked into CEO Rochelle Ames's office and placed a 40-page document on her desk without preliminary. "Rochelle," he said, "I commissioned an independent review of near-miss incident patterns at this facility over the past 18 months. Page 11 will be of particular concern to you." Rochelle opened it. She turned to page 11. She had been managing wealthy donors for 6 years, and she had developed a reliable sense for which ones were writing checks out of ego and which ones were writing them out of something else. Calder Morrow had always been the second kind, but she had never fully understood what the something else was until this moment, sitting across from a 40-page document that no one had asked him to produce. "There is also a matter from last Thursday," he said. "Ward 4. Someone identified and managed an anaphylactic event that the ward staff missed entirely. That intervention did not appear in any incident report. I would like to know why." Rochelle said she would have the ward reviewed. "I would also appreciate the name of the maintenance staff member assigned to Ward 4 that morning." He left before she could ask why he wanted it. Here is what you need to understand about Calder Morrow. On paper, he was exactly what people assumed. Self-made, controlled. The kind of man who built a $4 billion operation through intelligence and an appetite for work that his colleagues described as, privately, a little frightening. Over time, he had become so accustomed to operating at the highest levels of consequence that ordinary social discomfort had simply ceased to register. Cold, people said. Contained, the more generous ones said. What they did not know was that Calder Morrow had been a different person before. Before 4 years ago. Before a Thursday night in February, when his wife, Emery, had woken with a headache that would not ease, and they had driven to the hospital because that was what you did, the responsible thing, and Emery had been admitted and assessed, and the attending physician had reviewed her charts and discharged her the following morning with a prescription and instructions to rest. 12 hours after that discharge, Emery Morrow collapsed in their kitchen from a catastrophic cerebral hemorrhage. She died before the ambulance arrived. The investigation had concluded. Complications beyond clinical control. Calder had read that phrase until the words stopped meaning anything, and then he had started asking different questions. He had funded Crestwood's expansion not out of generosity, but out of proximity. He needed to be inside these walls. He needed to understand what complications beyond clinical control actually looked like when you were close enough to see it clearly. 4 years of looking, and no clear answer. Until 3 days ago, on the 4th floor, A woman in a maintenance uniform had crouched beside him with the certainty of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of emergency and then disappeared before anyone thought to ask her name. He found her on the 6th floor that afternoon. She was at the far end of the physician corridor, cleaning the window with her back to him. He walked the length of the hall. When he was close enough, he stopped. She turned, and he saw it. The quick flash of recognition crossing her face before she locked it back down to neutral. "Were you working Ward 4 last Thursday morning?" he asked. "Yes. I want to thank you for what you did." "I did not do anything notable, sir. I just happened to be nearby." "That is not what you did." He held her gaze. "You knew exactly what was happening to me, and you knew exactly what to do." She said nothing. "What is your name?" "Seren." "Full name." She held his gaze for one full second. "Seren Voss." He registered it. He turned to go. 3 steps, turned back. "Why do you carry an EpiPen in a maintenance cart, Ms. Voss?" The hallway was very quiet. "My mother is allergic," she said. Old habit. He looked at her for another moment, the kind of looking that is processing rather than observing. Then he nodded and left. That evening in the back seat of his car on Central Park West, he opened his MacBook Pro and typed 2 words. Seren Voss. Results in under a second. A news article from 14 months ago. New York doctor suspended following patient death. A state medical board notice. A Columbia alumni publication from 2 years earlier noting a residency achievement in neurovascular surgery. He read all of it. He sat in the car for a long time after without opening anything new. Then he sent 3 words to his chief of staff. Seren Voss, Crestwood. Find everything. He did not know yet what he was going to do with the information, but he knew one thing. The woman mopping the floors of Crestwood Medical Center understood more about what was happening inside this building than anyone on the payroll. Now, inside the building on the other side of this story, something else was in motion. Mirabelle Holt was 35, efficient, precise, and loyal to the man who paid her exceptionally well to be all 3. She sat outside Callum Vane's office and managed his schedule, his correspondence, his reputation, and on 2 occasions in the past 14 months, his contingency plans. She had been the one to delete the file. She had done it the way she did everything for Callum, carefully and cleanly, and she believed it was gone. She was wrong, but she did not know that yet. What she did know was that Calder Morrow had spent 4 minutes speaking with a maintenance worker on the 6th floor that afternoon. She pulled the badge record. Voss, S. Night Shift, Environmental Services. She walked it to Callum's office. Callum looked at the name for longer than she expected. His expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. The very particular shift of a man recognizing a threat he thought he had already neutralized. "Pull her full file," he said. And 3 floors below his office, Seren was finishing her last restock of the evening. She did not know her name had just landed on his desk. She did not know that the man from the 4th floor had spent 2 hours reading everything ever written about her. She did not know that the thing she had been quietly building for 6 months was about to be disturbed from 2 directions at once. She knew this. She was tired. Her feet hurt. She had $29 in her bank account, and in the sub-basement of this building, on a server no one had touched in 3 years, was a file that could give her life back. She just needed a little more time. What she did not know, could not have known yet, was what Calder Morrow was about to do next. The following morning, before Seren arrived for her shift, he was back. He went to Rochelle Ames first. He laid a printed email on her desk. It was a message Callum had sent to the board, recommending that the environmental services overnight budget be reduced, specifically citing the cost of personnel who had been in place longer than 5 years. Ozzy Thatch's name was in the margin notes. This recommendation, Calder said quietly, was submitted 4 days after a member of your overnight maintenance team prevented a serious medical incident on Ward 4. I would like to understand the timing. Rochelle looked at the email. I am freezing any staffing changes in environmental services, Calder said, effective today. If Dr. Vane has concerns about the budget, he can bring them to me directly. He left Rochelle's office and walked down to the service level. He found Ozzy Thatch in the supply corridor. I want to thank you for your work here, Calder said, specifically the work your team does on the overnight rotation. You have my personal attention on the staffing matter. That will not be moving forward. Ozzy looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man who has been in this building long enough to know the difference between a person who means what they say and a person who is performing it. Thank you, Mr. Morrow, Ozzy said. Calder nodded. He turned to leave, then paused without turning around. Does your team work the sub-basement corridor on their overnight rotation? We do, Ozzy said. Calder nodded again and left. Later that morning, on the 6th floor, Callum Vane stopped in the physician corridor and looked at the maintenance cart that was blocking the entrance to the supply room. Inside, Seren was restocking shelves with her back to him. He did not recognize her. She had cut her hair short, and her uniform was a different color from her residency scrubs. And she moved differently now. The particular quality of movement that comes from learning to be invisible in a building that once treated you as one of its own. He stood for a moment. Then he said, without looking directly at her, "Can you clear the cart from the doorway when you are finished, please? People need to pass." "Yes, sir," Seren said without turning around. He walked on. She stood in the supply room and breathed. He had been 2 feet away from her. He had looked directly toward her. He had not recognized her. She was still invisible. But she was running out of time. It was 10:52 at night when Calder Morrow walked into the environmental services break room in the basement level. There was no reason for him to be there. The sign said staff only. He opened the door and walked in as if he had been planning to for some time. Seren was at the small table. Her cart was outside. Her shift had technically ended 20 minutes ago. She had her notebook open, a hand-drawn floor plan with small notations in the margins. She looked up when the door opened. She did not look surprised. She looked the way a person looks when they have been doing complex thinking and someone has walked into the room where they are doing it. "Mr. Morrow," she said. He looked around briefly. Bare walls, fluorescent light, a coffee maker from another decade. He sat down across from her without asking if he could. "You know who I am," he said. "Your photograph is in the Morrow Medical Initiative annual report," she said. "I read it 6 months ago. I wanted to understand who was funding this hospital." "Why did that matter to you?" "Because the people who fund a place decide who it serves." He was quiet a moment. "I looked you up," he said. "I assumed you would. Columbia Irving, top of your cohort, 3 months from board certification when the suspension came through." He paused. "I read the case file in full. The way it was structured does not read like genuine negligence. It reads like someone who needed a specific signature on a record that needed to say something different from what actually happened." She held his gaze. He said, "My wife died in a hospital very much like this one, 4 years ago. I have spent 4 years trying to understand why no one caught what was happening in time to save her. And 3 weeks ago, a woman in a maintenance uniform caught something in 4 seconds that a full ward of nurses missed. He looked at her steadily. "Tell me what you are looking for," he said, "and tell me where it is." What happened in that room was not a rescue. I want to be precise about that, because this story is not about a woman who needed rescuing. What happened was an exchange between two people who had been operating on incomplete information for too long, each deciding in real time whether the risk of trusting a stranger was worth taking. Serene was not naive. She had not survived 14 months of this by extending trust easily. She knew the wrong alliance could end everything faster than Callum's threats. But she was also a scientist, and scientists understand that you cannot reach the truth alone if the evidence you need is behind a door you cannot open. She told him about the server, the physical backup unit in the sub-basement, the quality assurance recording from the night of the oval surgery, the conversation she believed was preserved on it. She told him about Mirabelle Holt and the deletion and why the primary server was clean, but the physical unit might not be. Calder listened without interrupting. When she finished, he opened his laptop. The screen showed a document she recognized. Morrow Medical Initiative Infrastructure Assessment, Crestwood Medical Center, 2021. Mirabelle Holt has Level 3 system access, he said. That covers the primary server and cloud storage. But the physical backup unit installed in 2019 under the original IT contract was flagged as incomplete during the 2021 upgrade. The contractor never pulled it. It is still drawing power from the building grid, and Level 3 access does not reach it. How do you know the access level structure? Because I paid for the system. He paused. I kept a copy of the original architecture specifications. She looked at him. You have been investigating Callum Vane. I have been investigating this hospital, he said. Vane kept appearing in the margins of things I was looking at. He looked at the table for a moment. When he looked up, his voice was different. Not controlled. Just true. My wife's attending physician the night she was discharged was a woman named Petra Langs. Internal medicine. She sent Emery home the morning before the hemorrhage. I never understood the decision. The clinical picture did not support early discharge. Serene felt something go very still inside her. Dr. Langs, she said slowly. She is still on staff here. Yes. Serene thought about the muffin, the warmth. The question posed as concern. She thought about something else. A name she had seen in old hospital donor records while mapping Crestwood's financial structure 6 months ago. The patient, she said. Marcus Oval. He was an attorney. His practice had a foundation connected to it. Langs and Oval Legal Foundation. I saw the name in a donor list. Is that connected to Petra Langs? Calder reached for his phone. Typed. Read. Set the phone down. Primary benefactor listed as a D. Langs, he said quietly. Donor correspondence directed to a Petra Langs, MD. Serene looked at him. She is not only protecting Callum, Serene said. She is protecting her own family from exposure. If the truth about the oval surgery comes out, the Langs name goes with it. And if the truth about Emery comes out, Calder said, his voice absolutely level, it connects to her as the discharging physician. The fluorescent light above them hummed. The door opened. Both of them turned. Ozzie Thatch stood in the doorway. His cart was behind him. His Jamaica thermos was in one hand, and a small external hard drive was in the other. Old plastic housing, the kind of unit that had been obsolete for 4 years. He did not look surprised to find Calder Morrow in the staff break room at 11 at night. He set the drive on the table between them. IT boys swapped out a rack unit in B2 yesterday, he said. Old physical backup. They were going to bin it. He shrugged. I do not like throwing away equipment that still has power in it. Seren looked at the drive. She looked at Ozzy. He picked up his thermos and turned to go. The night shift sees what the day shift buries, he said over his shoulder. And then he was gone and the door swung shut and the drive was sitting on the table in the fluorescent light. Calder looked at it. Serene picked it up. She held it in both hands. She had been mopping floors for 6 months for this. The next morning, Callum Vane found her. He came to the third-floor supply room at 8:47. It was the one corridor location in the building with a known camera blind spot, something Seren had mapped in her second week. The fact that he had found that out told her the net was tighter than she had assumed. He closed the door behind him. He was wearing his white coat. He always wore the white coat, even away from rounds, because the coat was part of the message. I will say this once, he said. Leave tonight. Resign effective immediately. I will ensure the board receives written confirmation that your conduct during suspension has been professional and compliant. You will have a realistic path to reinstatement in 18 months. What happens if I stay? Tomorrow morning, the board receives a report that a suspended physician has been performing unlicensed clinical assessments on active patients while employed as maintenance staff. His voice stayed even. That is not suspension, Seren. That is criminal impersonation. You will not practice medicine again. She looked at him. You have been building that threat for a while. Since the day Rochelle Ames told me a janitor flagged a reaction on Ward 4. He met her eyes. You have 12 hours. He opened the door and left. She stood in the supply room. She looked at the shelves, the stacked bottles, the folded supply bags, the mop handle in the corner. She went back to work. I want you to notice that. He walked in with a deadline and a threat, and the full institutional weight of a decorated career and the network of a man who had spent 20 years making himself indispensable to the people who ran this place. And she stood there and did not beg. She did not bargain. She did not crumble. She heard him. She weighed it. She decided. And she went back to work. Because that is what composure actually looks like when you have stripped everything away except the one thing they cannot take. The knowledge of what you came here for. She called Calder from a bench outside on her break. She told him about Callum's visit and the timeline. He listened without interrupting. Can you access the drive tonight? He asked. I cannot get to the B2 room alone. I need authorization credentials to boot the unit. I can have credentials by tonight, he said. Give me until 8. She looked out at the street. The November cold had pressed into the pavement, and the bare trees along Central Park West were moving against a gray sky. Calder, she said, if the file is not there, if the recording is corrupted. She paused. I need you to know I am not doing this because I need someone to save me. I am doing this because the truth is true whether or not I can prove it. I just need to prove it. He was quiet. I know, he said. That is why I am helping you. The morning she was supposed to move, she arrived at the service entrance at 5:57. She pressed her badge to the reader. Red light. She pressed again. A security guard stepped out from the booth. Ms. Voss, your access has been suspended pending an administrative review. You are on temporary leave effective this morning. She looked at the door. She looked at the building behind it. She turned and walked away. She stood on the sidewalk on 82nd Street in the cold and looked up at the glass and white stone of Crestwood Medical Center. Calder was inside. The drive was with Calder. The server room was in the basement. The hearing was 6 weeks away. Callum had moved faster than she anticipated. Her phone rang. Her attorney's voice was careful in the particular way of a person delivering news they wish they did not have to deliver. "Someone filed an emergency report with the board overnight," he said. "Criminal impersonation. If this proceeds, Seren, we are not talking about suspension anymore." She looked at the building. "I understand," she said. She hung up. She did not sit down. She did not walk away. She stood on the sidewalk and she thought. Because Seren Voss did her best thinking standing still, and because the problem had changed shape, but had not yet run out of solutions. She was still standing there when, through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the lobby, she saw the indicator light above elevator 3 stop blinking between floors. The emergency panel began to flash. A guard at the front desk was looking at the control board. A second guard was on a radio. Nobody was moving with the speed of people who knew there was someone inside. She looked at the elevator. She thought about the timing. She thought about Calder, who had told her he was coming in through the main entrance before the 10 o'clock board meeting. She went through the front doors. The guard at the desk stood up. "Ma'am, your access has been suspended. The person in that elevator," she said clearly, "is in cardiac distress. Call a code blue right now." She walked past him. The thing about certainty is that it moves differently than confidence. Confidence is something you can argue with. Certainty is something that makes you step aside before you have finished deciding why. The guard hesitated exactly long enough. She went to the elevator maintenance panel on the wall. She had studied the building schematics for 6 months. She knew where it was. She turned the manual release. The doors opened on the gap between floors. She climbed in. Calder was on the floor. He had caught the side rail on the way down. There was blood from a cut above his ear. His pulse was present but arrhythmic. Head trauma-induced vagal response. His heart was trying to find its rhythm. She did not hesitate. She did what she had spent 6 years training to do. She did it the way she had always done it, with the quiet precision of someone who understood that medicine at its most essential is not about equipment or credentials or the right badge on the right lanyard. It is about the irreducible knowledge of how a human body works, knowledge that cannot be suspended by a board order or mopped away by a shift change. She counted the compressions. She monitored his pulse with 2 fingers at the carotid. She talked to him in the low, steady voice she had learned, very early in residency, was the most useful voice in an emergency. Not urgent, not frightened, just present. "I have got you," she said. "Breathe. Come on, stay here. 6 minutes." She could hear the team assembling on the other side of the doors, the floor above, working to get through. And then his eyes opened, slowly at first. Unfocused. The eyes of someone whose brain was still catching up with the fact that he was alive. But then they found her face. He looked at her, not through her. At her. "It was you," he said. His voice was barely sound. "Last time. In the hallway. It was you." She did not answer. The team was almost through. His hand found her wrist. Not tight, not desperate, just present, the way you hold on to something when you have almost lost it and do not intend to again. "Don't go," he said. She did not go. The doors opened. The team came through. She gave them room, stepping back but not away, staying in the elevator while they worked around him. And when the lead paramedic looked up at her, taking in the maintenance uniform, the composed face, the hands that were not shaking, Calder said, from the floor, clearly and without question. She is a physician. She saved my life just now. The paramedic looked at her. She looked back. The guard who had followed her from the lobby was standing in the opening. The lobby beyond was filling. At the edge of the gathering crowd, Rochelle Ames had come down from her office when the code was called, and she was standing at the information desk, looking at the elevator, looking at the woman in the maintenance uniform, and something was happening behind her eyes. The small, visible moment of a story she thought she understood rearranging itself into something entirely different. Serene stood in the elevator with Calder's hand around her wrist. She had mopped the floors of this building for 6 months. She had been invisible for 14 months. She was not invisible anymore. 2 days later. 12th floor. Crestwood Medical Center. The boardroom where the annual governance review of the Morrow Medical Initiative Partnership took place every November. 25 people. Legal counsel, senior physicians, board members, foundation representatives. Callum Vane was at the front of the room presenting his case for the $22 million research contract. His slides were polished. His delivery was practiced. He was very good at this. He had always been very good at this. Dr. Petra Langs sat 2 chairs to his left in her role as medical advisory consultant. Rochelle Ames was at the head of the table. At the opposite end of the table, in the foundation chairman's seat, was Calder Morrow. His left arm was in a lightweight support brace. There was a bandage above his ear. He had discharged himself from Crestwood that morning against medical advice and come here instead, because there were things that could not wait for a recovery timeline. He had been sitting quietly for 22 minutes, listening to Callum's presentation. At the 23rd minute, he placed an iPad on the table. "Before we proceed to a vote," he said, "I need to share something with this board." He connected to the room display. The presentation screen changed. The first document was a surgical record. Original. Marcus Oval. Pre-operative notes. In the handwriting of the attending physician. Callum's handwriting. With a notation in the department's internal abbreviation system. A notation that any physician trained at this institution would recognize as the attending's flag for pre-operative alteration of his own cognitive status. A notation that did not appear in the version submitted to the board. The room was very quiet. "This was recovered," Calder said, "from the physical backup server in the sub-basement of this building. A unit that was never decommissioned during the 2021 infrastructure upgrade. The deletion of this record from the primary system was performed on the date and time shown here, using the administrative credentials of Mirabelle Holt." He moved to the second document. "This is the metadata log from the deletion event." Alongside it is a timestamp comparison showing the file existed on the primary server until 36 hours after Mr. Oval's death and was removed 18 hours before the board proceedings began. Callum stood up. "This is completely out of con." The third document appeared. The room went silent in a different way. The silence of people who are processing something they did not expect and cannot immediately explain. It was an email, internal, between 2 accounts registered to this hospital's system. The date was 4 years and 2 months ago. The subject line was blank. 3 sentences. Sender, Callum Vane. Recipient, Petra Langs. The email discussed a patient being moved toward early discharge. It discussed a situation that needed to be managed. And it used a phrase that was not clinical and was not accidental. "We need her gone before this becomes a problem for both of us." The patient was referenced by initials, E.M. Emery Morrow. When Calder spoke, his voice was completely controlled. "Dr. Langs," he said, You discharged my wife 12 hours before she died. I spent 4 years accepting the conclusion that this was a clinical judgment made in good faith. This email tells a different story. Petra Langs pressed her hands flat on the table. Her face did not move, but her hands, which had been still a moment before, were now pressed down with the particular quality of pressure that belongs to someone who needs something solid beneath them. Callum's voice was sharp. You cannot walk in here and accuse— The server does not forget what you deleted, Callum, Calder said. It just needed someone who knew the right questions to ask. Where is Dr. Voss? The question came from Rochelle Ames. Her voice was not entirely steady. The boardroom door opened. Seren Voss walked in. She was wearing her maintenance uniform. She had not gone home to change. She had not dressed herself up for this room or these people or this moment. She was exactly who she had been for 6 months, and she was done apologizing for what that looked like. She walked to the end of the table. She looked at Callum Vane. She did not raise her voice. I did not come here for revenge, she said. I came here for the truth. There is a difference. What happened next moved quickly. Callum Vane's hospital privileges were suspended immediately pending criminal investigation for falsification of medical records and evidence tampering. Petra Langs resigned before anyone asked her to. She stood up and walked to the door, and the room let her go, because what was waiting for her was not a confrontation in a boardroom, but a civil liability process that would follow her for years. On her way out, she passed the glass wall of the corridor, and on the other side of it, standing with his cart and his Jamaica thermos, was Ozzie Thatch, who had been watching through the glass. He raised his thermos once. Petra did not look at him. Mirabelle Holt was met at the elevator bank by 2 members of hospital security. She had been efficient, precise, and loyal to the wrong person for too long, and she was cooperative now in the particular way of someone who has understood that the weight of what they carried has become heavier than what they were paid to carry it. Rochelle Ames looked at Serene for a long time without speaking. The Foundation's first priority, Calder said from the end of the table, will be funding Dr. Voss's full reinstatement process, effective today. Through the window behind him, Central Park in November, bare and cold and gray, and at the far edge of the view, barely visible, the roofline of Hillcroft Memory Care, where Linda Voss was probably sitting in the common room right now, watching the sky. Outside the glass wall, Ozzie was still standing with his cart. He looked at Seren through the glass and nodded once, slowly, the way you nod at something that was always going to be true. That is how it is done, Ms. Voss, he said quietly, to no one in particular. 6 weeks later. Seren Voss stood before the New York State Medical Board for the last time. The hearing officer read the findings into the record in the flat-measured language of government proceedings. License reinstated effective immediately. All suspension records expunged. A formal notation of exculpatory evidence on file. There was no applause. There were fluorescent lights and plastic chairs, and the sound of a printer in the next room. Seren sat down, and she cried. Not loudly. Not for long. Just quietly, in the way you cry when something you have been holding together by main force for 14 months finally does not need to be held anymore. The next morning, she went to Hillcroft Memory Care. Her mother was in the chair by the window, light on her hands, watching the street. Linda Voss was 61 years old. The Alzheimer's had been taking things from her for 3 years now. The slow, specific cruelty of a disease that removes a person by degrees. She looked at Seren when she came. And in one of those moments, the ones that arrive without warning and stay as long as they stay, and you learn not to demand more of them than they are, Her mother looked at her and saw her. "Seren," she said. Seren sat down and took her hands. "You look lighter," her mother said. She was right. Calder came to her temporary office at Crestwood that afternoon. Rochelle had given her the room while the formal arrangements were being completed. It was small and smelled like fresh paint and had a window that faced the side street. He did not bring flowers. He brought a book. He set it on the desk in front of her. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Hardcover, new, a small slip of paper marking a page near the middle. She opened to the marked page. The passage read, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." "I have a habit," he said, "of finding books that people seem to need. I already have a copy, I know. Yours is falling apart. This one will last longer." She looked at him. "Is this your version of flowers?" Something shifted in his expression. "I do not know yet. I have not done this in 4 years. I am not entirely sure I remember how." She looked out the window. The street was beginning to show the first cautious signs of winter thaw, gray pavement and brown earth, the particular kind of beginning that is not beautiful yet, but is honest. "We could start with coffee," she said, "the kind you actually pay for." He was quiet for a moment, and then, for the first time in 4 years, Calder Morrow smiled. Not the controlled version, the real one, the kind that belongs to the person he had been before. 3 months after that, on a Saturday afternoon in the living room of his apartment on Central Park West, with the park spread out below the window and the winter light low and clear, Calder Morrow asked Seren Vos if she would build something with him. He did not get down on one knee. That was not who he was, and she had no patience for performance. He sat across from her at the table with his hands around a coffee cup, and he said, "I have spent 4 years not trusting anything inside those walls. And then there was you. And I would like to stop doing this alone if you are willing to stop doing it alone too." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "I have been alone in that building for a very long time." "I know," he said. She looked out at the park. She thought about the folder on her folding table, the cracked phone screen, the debit card that beeped once and went red, the mornings she had stood in front of the mirror in the blue maintenance uniform and told herself she was not finished yet. "All right," she said. "Let us try that." He reached across the table and took her hand and held it. And that was that. 6 months after that, on a bright May morning, the Morrow Neurovascular Research Wing opened at Crestwood Medical Center. New glass panels on the east side of the building, sunlight filling the space with the brightness of something that had been a long time coming. On the dedication board near the entrance, below the official language, 2 lines in smaller letters, in memory of Emery Morrow, and in honor of those who stayed. Calder stood beside Seren in the crowd, not performing anything, just beside her, the way you stand beside someone when you have decided where you are going. "How does it feel?" he said quietly. "Being here, not with a mop." She looked around at the room, the researchers, the young doctors, the building itself, its newness, its specific hard-won honesty. "Like I never left," she said. "Like I was always here." He squeezed her hand. She did not look away from the room. She had earned every inch of it. Stoic lesson. For 14 months, she cleaned the floors of the hospital that had taken everything from her. Not because she had no choice, but because she understood something that most people forget when they have been broken open by someone they trusted. Your calling is not a credential. It cannot be suspended by a board order. It cannot be falsified by someone else's signature. It cannot be mopped away. The world handed Seren Vos a mop and told her she was nothing. She picked up the mop. She used the time. She waited, not for someone to come and save her, but for the truth to do what truth eventually always does when someone refuses to stop believing in it. Find its way to the surface, and stay there. If you have ever been handed someone else's mistake and told it was yours to carry, if you have ever been invisible in a room where you were the most qualified person present, if you have ever kept going, not because it was easy, but because stopping was simply not something you were willing to do, then you already know who Seren Vos is. You have always known her, because she is the part of you that never gave up. If this story touched something real in you, subscribe to Love Drama Stories. Every week we bring you a story about love, dignity, and the quiet, unstoppable courage of people who refuse to let the truth stay buried. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Dignity is not something they can take. It is something you carry, even when your hands are full of something else entirely. And that is where Seren's story ends. Or maybe, more honestly, that is where it begins. If you are still here with us right now, I want you to know something. The fact that you stayed until this moment means this story touched something real inside you. Maybe it reminded you of a time when someone looked right through you. Maybe it brought back the memory of carrying someone else's mistake with your own hands. Or maybe it simply reminded you that you are still standing, still trying, still here. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Seren did not wait for the world to hand her justice. She picked up the mop. She used every single day they gave her as a janitor to get one step closer to the truth. And that is the lesson. The obstacle is never the end of your story. It is the story. You do not need a boardroom full of witnesses to know your own worth. You just need to keep going long enough for the truth to catch up. If this story meant something to you today, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. And subscribe to Love Drama Stories. Every week we bring you a new story about love, dignity, and the quiet power of people who refuse to give up. We will see you in the next one. This story is a work of fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, including Seren Vos, Calder Morrow, Dr. Callum Vane, Dr. Petra Langs, Ozzy Thatch, and Mirabelle Holt, are fictional and do not represent any real individuals, living or deceased. The events, institutions, organizations, and medical scenarios depicted in this story, including Crestwood Medical Center, Morrow Capital Group, and the Morrow Medical Initiative, are entirely invented and bear no intentional resemblance to any real hospital, company, or medical case. Any similarity to actual persons, real events, or existing organizations is purely coincidental and unintentional. The medical situations described are dramatized for narrative purposes and should not be interpreted as accurate medical advice or clinical guidance. This content is produced for creative storytelling and emotional engagement only. Love Drama Stories does not claim that the events portrayed are factual, and no part of this video is intended to mislead, defame, or misrepresent any real person, institution, or medical practice.